What's up guys, Asian here again with another theory crafting video, and today we're going to be discussing the difference between Witchmother's Potent Brew and Blue Food, Max Health Max Magicka food. These two foods are kind of the two recommended foods that you see in a lot of Magicka DPS build guides. A lot of people advocate for one or the other. Some people say it doesn't really matter. For example, I advocate very much so for Witchmother's Potent Brew, but other build guides might recommend only Max Health Max Magicka food instead. And so today we're going to kind of be discussing the pros and cons of each, as well as show you guys the DPS difference that you can expect to see, as well as make apparent any sustained problems you might see when you're using one or the other food. So real quick, we're just going to start off by talking about both of the foods. So Blue Food, otherwise known as Max Health Max Magicka food, is a collection of foods. This is only just one of the ones that you can make, but they all have identical stat boosts. It increases max health by 53.95 and max magicka by 49.36 for 1 hour. It is a food, so if you're going to look at provisioning passives to boost the duration or how many you make, you're going to be looking for the food passives, not the drink passives. So these are pretty much in the base game. You can get them pretty much by looting random stuff or by doing your provisioning writs. On the other hand, you have Witchmother's Potent Brew. This comes from the Holojack Festival. So that comes around once every year during Halloween on ESO, but the recipe itself is tradable, so if you are part of a trade guild and you have withdrawal privileges, check out your guild banks to see if they have any sort of recipes up for sale or up for grabs, or you can purchase the recipe straight off of guild traders for a couple of 1,000 gold or so. It does scale based on your level, but at CP 160 or max level, you have Max Magicka increases by 31.92, increases your max health by 35.11, and your Magicka regen increases by 319 for 2 hours. So this is a drink, so if you're looking at provisioning passives, you're going to want to make sure to get the ones that boost the duration of drinks and not food. So you can already see there's pretty big difference when it comes to the maximum resources that you get from both of them. Witchmother's Potent Brew drops your Max Magicka and Max Health compared to Blue Food by about 2,000 once you take into consideration passives. So that is a non-insignificant drop. It's pretty noticeable when it comes to damage, but the difference between Witchmother's Potent Brew and Blue Food, the big one obviously, is going to be that Magicka recovery of 319. That is affected by your passives and things like that, so it's much closer to about 400 to 500 Magicka regen, depending again on your passives, things like race and class and things like that. But you can expect to see a minimum of 400 boost to your Magicka regen, even if you are a non-Magicka inclined class, or race I should say. So that's kind of where the argument primarily hinges on, that Magicka regen and the difference in your maximum stats. A lot of people who use Witchmother's Potent Brew, who advocate for Witchmother's Potent Brew, says that PvE is more based on how well you can sustain your DPS, and the more heavy attacks you have to do in a rotation, the less DPS you're going to be pulling, because heavy attacks generally lower your DPS while you're channeling. The exception to this, of course, being heavy attack builds. So that's kind of the argument for Witchmother's Potent Brew, that when you have that additional regen, you're able to maintain your rotation for a lot longer period of time. You don't have to incorporate more heavy attacks than is necessary, so you're not dropping your DPS by as much. The argument for Blue Food, however, is that with group buffs, things like orbs, worm, things like that, you shouldn't need to add more heavy attacks than you already are on a standard rotation, so you're going to want to use Blue Food in order to boost the damage that you're able to do. So that's kind of the argument for using Blue Food instead of Witchmother's Potent Brew. The whole fact that that extra 2k Magicka translates to about a rough 200 increase in your abilities damage, so Blue Food is going to win out, even though you will have to heavy attack maybe a little bit more often in order to maintain that rotation. So today we're going to be doing two parsers, one with Blue Food, one with Witchmother's Potent Brew. This is on a 3 million dummy, so any sort of sustain problems you see, that's kind of the big thing that I want you guys to focus on. The sustain is only going to be made worse with an actual in-raid parse. Because remember that the 3 million dummy parse is very short compared to that of an actual raid boss. Most raid bosses last anywhere between 4 to 5 minutes. It all depends on the group DPS, obviously. A higher the DPS, the shorter the fight. But ultimately, on those longer fights, you're going to want to know how well you're going to be able to sustain your rotation against that boss, because, like I said, heavy attacks generally cause a DPS loss overall unless you're running a heavy attack build. So that's kind of what I want you guys to focus on, not just on the DPS that we pull, but also on the sustain. So what is my relative magicka, percentage magicka left when I use my shooting star ultimate, when I drink my second potion, when we enter execute, things like that. I'm going to maintain the same rotation throughout both parses, so I'm not going to change my rotation when I'm on blue food or when I'm on Witchmother's Potent Brew, so you guys can get a closer to a one-to-one comparison looking at the sustain. So the only time I'm going to heavy attack if I'm using blue food outside of my typical rotation is if I do not have any more magicka to use abilities. So that's the only time I'm going to be changing my rotation with blue food. Other than that, though, we're going to be maintaining the exact same rotation throughout the entire parse. We are doing this on a non-pet build, and I have done this test on a Magicka Nightblade as well, so you guys will be able to see the difference between not just a Magicka Sorcerer, but also the DPS difference when you're looking at a Magicka Nightblade that has better sustain than the Sorc does. So we're going to start things off with Witchmother's Potent Brew. I do have a health enchant on my Lambris Helm, and that's just to put my health at a reasonable level for vet trials, because otherwise, if you don't have that health glyph, or if you don't have any points into health, you're sitting at 15.1k health, which obviously is not something I would recommend you do for vet trials. So like I said, I'm not going to be changing rotation between the two of them. You can see here at our first heavy attack, we started off at 19% magicka. We drank our potion at about 25% magicka. Now we're entering execute with about 35% magicka. So there we go. So we pulled about 34k or so using Witchmothers. Let me just put that down on our spreadsheet. 407. So now we're going to swap over to blue food. I'm going to replace this health enchant with a magicka enchant because we don't need that extra health any longer, because we are sitting at 17k with blue food. So we're going to do the exact same rotation. Let me just get my ultimate back up. So you guys will be able to see the difference in sustain between blue food and Witchmother's Potent Brew. So as a reminder, we did our first heavy attack at 25% magicka. We drank it was 25% magicka, I forget the exact number, but around there. Drank our first potion after the first one, so second potion at about 25%, and we entered execute with about 35% magicka. And again, I'm not going to change my rotation, so any additional heavy attacks you do is because I am completely out of magicka and I can't use my abilities anymore. start our heavy attack at 12% Magicka this time. So when we drank our potion with Brew, it brought us up to, you can see here I did do a heavy attack, and that's just because I don't think I can sustain this rotation very well otherwise. See here we're entering, even with that additional heavy attack, we're entering with only 26% Magicka left. We're definitely not going to be able to stay it all the way through the end of Execute. Yeah, you can see here. Alright. So there we go. That was with Soup, we pulled lower, 33,755, and that's because I had to do that extra heavy attack, and we ended up running out of Magicka at the very end. So that's something that you're going to want to keep in mind when we take a look at these parses here. Alright, so just had to enter that into our spreadsheet. So now over to that spreadsheet now. So here we have our numbers. Witchmothers on the left, Soup on the right, Blue Food on the right, with the Magicka Sword here and the Nightblade here. So I can see here that we are pulling higher with Blue Food compared to Witchmothers. However, like you saw with that parse, our sustain was absolute garbage with the Blue Food. I had to put in an extra heavy attack, and even with that heavy attack we ended up running out of Magicka during Execute phase, and we didn't have that same problem with Witchmothers. But you can see here that Soup does end up pulling a little bit higher on average compared to Witchmothers by about 1.75%. Over on the Magicka Nightblade side, it's 2.3% higher. But again, that sustain problem that we saw, it's kind of an issue. Again, this is only a 3 million dummy parse, so it's not even that long of a parse, but we were already running out of steam towards the end of our parse there. So what does that really tell you about an actual raid boss? You're going to have to change your rotation a little bit. You're going to have to heavy attack more often. You know, so for a Witchmother's parse, you might be able to get away with a heavy attack every 1.5 rotation. With a Blue Food parse, you're probably going to end up needing to heavy attack every full rotation, which ends up dropping your DPS by a little bit. Plus, you also have to consider that if you do happen to die or you have to res somebody and you're not attacking, you know, that extra regen from Witchmothers is still applying, so you're still getting more Magicka back when you're doing those kind of things, when you get revived, when you have to play mechanics, when you are resing somebody, compared to using Blue Food. So that's something that you're going to want to keep in mind when you decide which food you want to take. Now, if during a raid, you know, let's say you're using Blue Food and you're not having a problem sustaining, then yes, continue to use Blue Food because you don't have that sustain problem. However, if you are having trouble sustaining during a raid, it might benefit you to switch over to Witchmothers and add that health enchant to a large piece so you meet that health threshold or move some points into health. This is again kind of up to you and kind of up to your group how well you're able to sustain with Worm and Orbs and things like that. But there is a valid argument to be made for using Witchmothers over Blue Food, even though Blue Food does end up pulling higher DPS on average. And that's just that sustained DPS is a lot more important in PvE, and Witchmothers provides that versus Blue Food, which really doesn't really give you any sort of boost to your regen. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.